Rebel Moon Part 2 dropped unceremoniously on Netflix not too long ago, and as I mentioned in my previous video, I took a good look at it. As it turns out, I was right, there's no saving it. Two major factors caused the budding franchise to be nipped in the bud: Snyder's lofty ambitions and Netflix's probable interference. Hi, my name is Pat and welcome to Rewrite. Today I'm gonna take a look at Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver. Let me start with the good. It's a Snyder-directed movie and it shows. It has its typical style of filmmaking with lots of speed ramping and close-angle shots. Whether one likes this type of cinematography or not is up to the individual. I appreciate the fact that Zack Snyder created a distinguishable style of filmmaking and directing for himself. It's a commendable effort and not an easy feat to accomplish. His style of filmmaking is suitable for depicting engaging fights, and Snyder has a clear knack for making things look cinematic. The farming scene shows that well. I actually liked it, particularly the scene where they harvested the grain. I can tell a lot of effort went into shooting this. Judging objectively, it's well shot and it perfectly captures the essence of strenuous manual labor. After watching this, I felt eerily compelled to buy a tractor, hence making it a fantastic John Deere commercial. Which leads to a peculiar problem. That's not what this is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a space war movie. It's ironic that as immersive as this farming scene is, it takes the audience out of the overarching looming threat of a space war. The tones of the two halves of the movie are mismatched. You have an almost calm and serene, borderline uplifting sequence followed by a dead serious one. When watching the first part, it felt almost as if they invested more effort into growing the crops than they did into writing the script. And with that failure, let me segue into the many negatives overshadowing the movie and the franchise as a whole. The most glaring flaw of the movie was its pacing. Clocking in at a little less than 2 hours, about 110 minutes without credits, the movie felt slow and disengaging. The reason for that was its abysmal pacing and broken structure. Pacing in a nutshell is alternating between slow and fast scenes, or in other words, action and dialogue. Rebel Moon 2's first half of the movie is nothing but slow scenes with almost no dialogue, which is needed for drama or suspense. There's the farming, the Last Supper, more farming, dancing, singing, and lastly the war preparations. The second half is followed up by non-stop fighting. It goes from skirmish to skirmish to skirmish to skirmish. If you were to graph out the suspense, it looked like this: steady horizontal line changing into a gradually increasing line halfway through until it hits its peak and then ends. There's no denouement either. The movie doesn't feel like a conclusive experience. It just finishes the current leg of the journey and haphazardly sets up the next leg in an attempt to sucker in the audience to keep watching.
What am I to do?
You have a reason now, do you not?
The movie actually has interesting plot points that could have been used to create drama and suspense in the first half.
We haven't heard from you. What is your story?
But the writers chose not to implement any subplots, failing to give this movie any substance. They solely focused on the main plot, defense of the village or grain instead. Writing is arguably the most important part of a story. Good writing creates an interesting setting, intriguing characters, engaging plot, and sets the pacing. If one or two of these elements aren't up to par, other elements can be used to cover that up. Take James Cameron's Pocahontas in Space, Avatar for example. Overall, the writing is weak, but it does its job of writing the vehicle well enough. Obviously, no one is watching these movies because they expect grandiose writing. No, they're interested in the novel implementation of VFX and how much the VFX bar has risen again. Godzilla movies are the same. Nobody watches this movie expecting mind-blowing dialogue. They wanna see CGI monsters duke it out. Rebel Moon has none of that appeal. The universe is empty, the main conflict is boring, the characters are underdeveloped, the backstory is uninteresting, and while the visual effects are good, they're nothing groundbreaking. Rebel Moon is a high-budget mockbuster. There are two scenes in particular I want to highlight in this movie. One scene ruined the movie, while the other scene ruined the potential of the franchise. The first scene had two major issues: wrong decision making and wrong placement in the movie. The scene in question is the assassination of the princess. When the scene came up, two possible scenarios came to my mind. Scenario A: overwhelmed by emotion, Korra is unable to pull the trigger and lowers her gun. This action proves she's a good-natured person at heart, ordered to do bad things, creating a struggle, an internal conflict within. At the same time, due to her disobedience, she betrays Belisarius and his expectations of her, embarrasses him in front of high-ranking members, damaging his reputation. Her disobedience draws his ire and calls her loyalty to the Motherworld into question, turning her into a huge liability, now that she's aware of the assassination plot but not on board with it. Scenario B: she grows a backbone, shoots Belisarius, and attempts to save the princess. She ultimately fails, is forced to abandon her, and flees by herself. All the points from scenario A apply here as well, but additionally you end up with a more rebellious and decisive character and give her a strong motive for rescuing the princess in the subsequent story, redemption of the initial failure. The movie opted for another scenario instead, which to be fair managed to subvert my expectations, but in a bad way. She obeys Belisario's command, gets accused of being the perpetrator, and then escapes. First of all, that's a lot of wasted opportunity to build character and create sources for potential conflicts of subplots. Here's the reason why the chosen scene doesn't work. She's a highly decorated and loyal soldier who betrays the hand that feeds her for no apparent reason. She's a terrible choice of patsy because she has no motive or anything to gain from the betrayal. Belisarius literally sacrificed his most loyal pawn for no reason. The assassination takes place in front of a lot of people, making it unnecessarily difficult to manage potential leaks. And lastly, Korra escapes. This is the one thing you want to prevent at all costs after planning a premeditated murder and blaming it on a patsy. Do not let the fall guy escape. The fact that they didn't plan for her to be overwhelmed and captured on the spot made this feel like a badly executed spur-of-the-moment decision rather than a meticulously planned assassination. In other words, it's plain bad writing. What did you guys think about the scene? Leave a like and share your opinions in the comments down below. The second scene that I disliked that killed the franchise for me was when General Titus unceremoniously revealed that the princess was still alive.
For the princess is still alive.
He should not have been the one to reveal it, but before I delve into the shortcomings of this scene, I recommend you watch my video on the first part because I talk about how the princess should have been implemented into the story and I'm not gonna repeat myself. Anyway, let's get to it. The timing of his reveal couldn't have been any worse. It feels tacked on, like a desperate move to ensure that the audience stays interested in the story. At the end, Korra lacked the motivation to keep going. The village burnt down and the villagers had now other priorities. More ships may come, so the best option for any of them is to disappear for the time being. Besides, General Titus shouldn't have been the one to reveal the truth, but Admiral Noble. General Titus has no reason to lie, therefore it's the truth. If Admiral Noble had said it to taunt Korra during their final fight, it could be either true or false. The uncertainty of the source of the information perpetuates conflict just by existing. Is it the truth or not, and how can she figure it out? Admiral Noble could have used it to mess with Korra, with the goal of preventing Korra from going into hiding and goad her into haphazardly attacking the Mother World. Regardless of his motivations, it would have given Admiral Noble more character depth than just be an angry prick in space. There is hidden potential in both these scenes that was destroyed by their actual placement in the story. First, Korra's confession. It should have not been revealed this early in the movie, but during the scene where everybody is at the table and shares their backstory. This scene addresses the fact that these characters are underdeveloped, but it's too little too late. It also felt forced and out of place. What really irks me though is how the audience already knows what happened. They're in on the secret. Titus though keeps nagging Korra about it, meaning he knows. Keeping the audience in the dark about it would have been the right move here. She could have divulged half of the story about how she was present when Belisarius killed the king, but left out the princess's assassinations by her. The group picking up on her secret but not pressing the matter could have been the skeleton in the closet the story so desperately needed. It would have sown distrust between the members and overshadowed their bonds with the possibility of betrayal. There could have been a villager who pins the village's predicament on Korra and who advocates for negotiations with the admiral where they hand her over as well as the grain to prevent the fight. In general, there wasn't enough infighting within the group. Compared to Star Wars, the rebel group wasn't as unified in their opinions either, primarily Han Solo. In Rebel Moon, everybody boringly falls in line and is on the same page about everything. Conflicts drive the story. The story severely lacked a clash of opinions, and the reason for that were the utterly underdeveloped characters who all shared the same backstory, more or less. If, after the big fight, Korra opened up about her past and her role in the assassination, revealing the second half of the story, now General Titus realizing that she doesn't know the full story and the princess is still alive and revealing it wouldn't have been such a letdown and felt so out of place. One of the biggest aspects that went under is that if you look at part 1 and 2 separately, they suck, especially when it comes to pacing. But when combined, you get an actual 3-act structure that even adheres to Aristotle's classical curve of suspense, more or less. Zack Snyder has mentioned before that Rebel Moon is supposed to be watched as a whole. The decision to split the movie and release them 3 months apart damaged its intended vision much more than assumed. What the exact reasoning behind this decision was, I do not know. But if I had to guess, Netflix decided to min-max profits, but it completely backfired. inspired. What Netflix essentially did is take the first Lord of the Rings, for example, and when the hobbits make it to the gates of Moria, you end the movie and call it part 1. The second part would start with the hobbits dicking around in front of the gates for an hour before actually going in. Rebel Moon started with how Harry Potter and the Hunger Games ended their franchises, where they split the finale in two to milk the fanbase as much as possible. So, is Snyder not to blame? On the contrary, the decision to split the movie was the final nail in the franchise's coffin, but watching it in one go won't resolve the underlying issues, which is the bad writing. The premise sucked, the world building is non-existent, the plot is boring, there are no subplots, and the characters are underdeveloped. Regardless of if the movie was split into two or not, the film wouldn't have received a good score anyway. To have an actual shot at success, it needed to be rewritten from the ground up. There won't be a rewrite this time around because there's frankly no point to it. None of the shortcomings I mentioned in the first part were fixed. If you haven't seen it already, feel free to check it out. It analyzes the flaws more in depth. If you've made it this far, leave a like, and if you'd enjoy this type of content, consider subscribing to the channel, it'd help me out a lot. Netflix and Snyder were planning on creating a juggernaut franchise similar to Star Wars, with video games, books and comics accompanying it. But if there's one thing I've learned in my life, it's no matter how meticulously you plan something, there will always be something unaccounted for. In this case, it was the underwhelming reception stopping the intended franchise dead in its tracks before it could even properly lift off. But Snyder doesn't get out of this debacle scot-free. At the heart of it all, the writing trio is responsible for the whole fiasco. The one thing I'm curious about is if Netflix hired the other two or if Snyder did, because neither of them seems to be the first choice to pen a movie like Rebel Moon, judging based on their previous works. I have the creeping suspicion that Snyder just hired yes men to make what he wanted to make, and if that is the case, he wholeheartedly deserves this failure. Creating an engaging world and thinking of how to present it to an audience unfamiliar with it presents an enormous challenge. I feel like Snyder took this task too lightly, despite him claiming to have been working on it for more than a decade. It's not a secret that Snyder wanted to create a Snyder Star Wars, but Star Wars was a surprise hit. George Lucas initially thought it was going to be a total flop. It became a huge success and George Lucas, with many others, continued to build on it for several decades. Rebel Moon is doing it backwards. They want to be a huge success now, without putting in the time and effort needed first. That mindset is one of the biggest reasons contributing to the failure of this franchise, if you ask me. Snyder is gonna re-edit the movie and add 2 more hours to it. Snyder claims it'll be a different movie, but in my opinion, extra footage still won't fix the fundamental flaws. At this point, I've lost all interest in the franchise and the 6.5 hour long movie won't change that. Anyway, this is it for me this time around. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. If you'd like to see more, check out some of my other videos and subscribe to the channel. I'd greatly appreciate it.